In 1958, in a quaint suburban home, siblings Tommy, 12, Jake, 10, and Emily, 8, eagerly awaited their favorite cartoon. The beloved theme song played, but its notes were twisted as if played backward. On the screen, the colors of the characters were faded, and their eyes unnaturally wide. The main character, a puppet named Toby, turned and whispered unsettlingly, "Are you ready for some fun?" Tommy shivered, but they dismissed it as imagination. The house lay silent at midnight, only the clock ticking. Then giggles and creaking floorboards disturbed the quiet. Tommy awoke to find a shadowy figure at the foot of his bed, whispering in a chilling, emotionless voice, "It's time to play, Tommy." Terrified, Tommy looked across the room where Jake and Emily also sat up wide-eyed. The figure moved closer. In 1960, Aunt Sophia visited with her daughter Lily, who awoke thirsty. Returning from the kitchen, she heard whispers from the children's room. Peeking inside, she saw the cartoon figures with black, void-like eyes and unnatural smiles encircling the siblings. Emily giggled holding one's hand, while Jake, transfixed before a mirror, seemed to communicate with the invisible. Horrified, Lily screamed. The following evening, as the family watched TV, an unfamiliar and unsettling commercial appeared. A warped face materialized on the screen with void eyes and a grotesque smile, whispering, "Let's play." Lily screamed, recognizing the face from her previous night's vision. The adults were baffled, except for Grandpa, who watched with growing dread. After midnight, troubled by Lily's account, Grandpa sat alone in the dim living room. At precisely 3 a.m., the television sparked to life unaided. The face reappeared, staring intently at Grandpa and whispering, "Finally, it's your turn." Immobilized, a long dark hand emerged from the screen and seized him, vanishing him instantly. The TV switched off, leaving the house in solitude. The next morning, the children found the TV off but Grandpa missing. "Where's Dad?" Tommy's mother asked, worried. Grandma revealed that he hadn't returned to bed. The kids stared at the silent TV, chills running down their spines. Emily was about to speak when a giggle echoed from the TV. Despite it being off, it flickered for a moment, and hollow black eyes peered back. To be continued. The family woke up to a nightmare no one was prepared for. Grandpa was gone. They searched every corner of the house, his room, the garden, even the nearby street, but there was no sign of him. It was as if the earth had swallowed him up. No clues, no sounds, no explanation. Mom was in shock, calling the neighbors, asking if anyone had seen him. Aunt Susan sat pale-faced, holding her little daughter Sophie, who hadn't stopped crying since dawn. Meanwhile, the three kids, Ethan, Jake, and Lily, sat in their room in silence, their fear growing with each passing second. They knew that Grandpa's disappearance wasn't a simple accident. It was connected to what was happening with the TV, and to the characters that were no longer just cartoons. Jake whispered, as if afraid someone might hear him, "It's our fault. We thought they were just cartoon characters, but something's wrong with them, something unnatural." Lily hugged her knees, whispering, "Grandpa tried to warn us, but now he's gone instead of us." Ethan stared at the floor for a moment, before looking up with determination. "We have to find out the truth, and stop whatever is happening before we lose someone else." But the question that haunted them all was, how? Night fell, but this time it felt different, heavier, eerier, as if something unseen was watching them from every corner. The lights were off, and everyone went to their rooms. But Ethan couldn't sleep. A strange feeling crept over him, sending chills down his spine for no apparent reason. Then in the dead silence he heard it, a faint sound coming from the living room. It wasn't the wind, nor the rustling of trees outside. It was whispers, distant, eerie whispers, as if someone was speaking, but their words were barely audible. Slowly, he got out of bed and tiptoed towards the sound. With each step, his heart pounded faster. The whispers grew clearer. They sounded familiar. And when he entered the living room, he froze. The TV was on, but it wasn't plugged in. No one had turned it on. And on the screen, Ethan saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. Grandpa. He was sitting in a dark room, his face pale, his eyes filled with fear. Ethan tried to scream, to call out to him, but no sound came from his mouth. Then Grandpa started speaking, his voice broken and distorted, as if something was stopping him from talking clearly. Don't play. Don't trust. They are not. Suddenly the screen went black. Grandpa vanished. Ethan felt a shiver crawl down his spine, and then another sound, a muffled chuckle, but it didn't come from the TV. He turned around quickly, no one was there. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he bolted back to his room, slamming the door shut, his chest heaving as he struggled to calm his frantic breathing. The next morning, Ethan gathered Jake and Lily, and told them what he had seen. Their faces turned pale, but Jake looked the most terrified. He understood what this meant. So Grandpa isn't missing. He's trapped inside the TV. Ethan nodded gravely. We have to get him out. But we don't know how. Before they could even think of a plan, something happened that made them freeze in place. Their favorite show's theme song started playing, but it wasn't its usual airtime. It was only 7 a.m. Slowly they turned toward the TV, and what they saw was not supposed to be there. On the screen, the eerie character from the strange commercial appeared again, but this time it was smiling. A cold, menacing smile. It slowly raised its hand and pointed directly at them. Then in a raspy voice it spoke. It's time to play. At that moment, the lights in the room went out. Objects started moving on their own. Heavy footsteps echoed toward them. But no one was in the room. Lily screamed, Jake grabbed Ethan's hand, and Ethan tried to stay calm. Then the TV swung open, as if it were no longer a screen, but a portal. A swirling, dark void inside it began pulling them in. They tried to resist, but the force was too strong. And then they were falling into darkness. When they opened their eyes, they were no longer at home. The floor was covered with an old, tattered carpet. The walls were covered in eerie drawings, children with no faces. The air was thick with the musty smell of decay. The three of them stood frozen, looking around in fear. Jake's voice came out in a shaky whisper. Are we inside the TV? Ethan scanned the eerie surroundings carefully before answering. I think so. But this isn't the show we used to watch. This place is different. Suddenly, a moaning sound echoed from a dark hallway ahead. They cautiously stepped forward and saw an open door. And inside, Grandpa. He was chained up, his body weak, his eyes full of terror. When he saw them, he screamed desperately. Run, before it's too late. But before they could move, the doors behind them slammed shut. And someone else appeared. The creepy character from the commercial. But now it wasn't just an image on the screen. It stood before them tall, half of its face rotting away, its eyes glowing red. It smiled, a wicked, twisted grin, and spoke in a raspy voice. Didn't you say you wanted to play? Well then, let the real game begin. To be continued in the next episode. The ground trembled violently beneath their feet, as if a massive earthquake was about to swallow them whole. The walls around them were no longer just walls. They had transformed into pitch-black mirrors reflecting terrifying images of other children. Faces twisted, eyes hollow like gateways to another world. Emma let out a terrified scream, stepping back in horror, while Jake frantically tried to untie Grandpa's restraints from the wall. But the moment he reached out, shadowy hands slithered from the mirrors, moving like serpents, reaching for them, trying to drag them inside. Nathan grabbed his sibling's hands, his voice shaking but filled with determination. We have to get out of here. We need to end this game before it's too late. But the sinister figure was approaching them, its footsteps heavy, its wicked grin growing wider. It stretched its unnaturally long fingers toward them, and whispered in a bone-chilling voice. No one leaves the game until it's over. At that moment, Grandpa remembered something buried deep in his memory, something he had forgotten until now. His voice trembled as he shouted, The TV! It's the key. If you destroy the screen, you'll all be free. Nathan's eyes darted around until he saw it. An old, oversized black television standing in the corner, like it had been watching them all along. Without hesitation, he grabbed a sharp metal object from the floor, raised it high, and smashed it into the screen with all his strength. Crash! A blinding white light erupted from the shattered screen, engulfing the entire room. A blood-curdling scream erupted from the dark figure. A scream so unearthly it seemed to echo from the depths of hell. Its body began to disintegrate, piece by piece, dissolving into nothingness. And then, darkness. Back to reality, the children awoke to the sound of their mother's frantic voice, shaking them gently. Kids, wake up. What happened? They opened their eyes to find themselves sprawled on the floor of the living room. The same place they had been before the nightmare began. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Slowly, they turned toward the television. It was completely off. Grandpa sat in the corner, staring at the blank screen, his eyes filled with fear. His voice was low but clear. We shut it down, but it's not over. They all stared at the TV in silent dread. It was dark, lifeless. Yet in the bottom corner of the screen, an almost imperceptible flicker pulsed, like something inside hadn't been defeated yet. Then from the TV's speakers a faint, raspy whisper echoed through the silence. Wanna play? Grandpa exhaled shakily and sat up, his face pale. Then, in a voice heavy with the weight of old secrets, he began to tell them a story, one that had been hidden for generations. Over 2 centuries ago, in 1805, this house belonged to a wealthy man, a man too miserly to spend a single cent protecting his own family. He lived here with his wife and their 3-year-old daughter, deep in a remote town. Only a handful of houses stood nearby, each surrounded by tall fences to guard against the wild wolves that roamed the nearby mountains. But the father, as cheap as he was, refused to build a fence around his property, ignoring his wife's pleas and the neighbors' warnings. And then one fateful afternoon, his wife played in the garden with their daughter under the warm sunlight, unaware that a starving wolf had slipped through the open gate. Everything turned to chaos in seconds. The mother screamed, shielding her child, but the beast lunged at her, sinking its teeth into her shoulder. She collapsed, blood soaking her dress as she cried out to her little girl, "Run! Go inside!" But the child didn't move. She stood frozen, sobbing, unable to understand what was happening, as the wolf tore into her mother. And the father? He stood on the second-floor balcony, watching motionless. Maybe he was terrified. Maybe he was just too much of a coward. Either way, he did nothing. The housemaid rushed outside at the sound of screaming, grabbed the little girl, and dragged her inside, while the mother was left to her fate. She died, right before her daughter's innocent eyes. Years passed, and the little girl grew up, carrying the weight of that day with her, along with a seething hatred for her father, who had done nothing to save her mother. But he didn't care. His only concern was finding a wealthy husband for his daughter, so he wouldn't have to spend a dime on her. He knew she loved a poor village boy, but he refused the idea outright. Forcing her to marry a rich merchant instead, she begged, she wept, but he ignored her. But the marriage wasn't what her father had imagined. Her husband was a cruel, drunken man. He beat her for no reason, controlled her every move, and stripped away everything, even her dignity. She endured years of torment, never knowing peace. Then one night, she found her husband dead. He had drowned himself in liquor, drinking until his body could take no more. For the first time, she felt free. She finally married the man she had loved all along, the poor boy from the village, the one who had always made her smile. And for a while she was happy. But happiness never lasts long in a cursed house. She gave birth to twin boys. They were conjoined, and that was the beginning of the curse.